think we'll start with some meditation. So, one thing I don't have here in this MD meditation center is a bell, but I think I can make my phone do that. And we're only going to sit for maybe about 20 minutes or well, maybe 30. We'll see. So get comfortable. Let your body relax. Usually the first thing to attend to is your posture and whether or not you're sitting in a comfortable way, or if you're lying down in a way that you can stay alert and be comfortable. And even though your mind may not quite be ready to settle, I know for myself, I bring my attention to my breath. And it's not really quite the time yet to start anapanasati, perhaps, but paying attention to my breath helps me to be calm, helps me to calm my whole body. And when I said it's not quite time yet to start formal anapanasati practice or mindfulness of in and out breathing, that's because we want to first, as much as we can, address whatever hindrances arise. So we observe the breath. And breathing in, really filling the body with the breath, and breathing out, relaxing, letting go of stress, letting go of tension. You might want to smile. It helps bring some of those wonderful chemicals out into the body. And right now it's a little cold here, so I'm noticing that. But of course, we often meditate in conditions that aren't perfect. In fact, they're rarely perfect. So we can notice what's happening and still turn our attention to relaxing the body and calming the mind. And then we have our opportunity to really look at what's happening in the mind. And we can notice if there is the desire for something or aversion to something. Classically called sensual desire and ill will. Or maybe some of what we're going to discuss today, dullness and drowsiness. Or restlessness, or doubt. And if any of these are quite strong, then we'll want to address them directly. But sometimes they're just a background, more subtle energy. And then we can really overcome them by bringing more enthusiasm and attention, and interest in the breath, or whatever object you would be using as your point of focus. Or you might think of it as your vehicle for immersion. It could be loving kindness or appreciative joy. And there, of course, are a number of other possibilities. But I'm going to refer to this in terms of the breath. So aware of breathing in and aware that you're breathing out. And if there's no hindrance that's very strong, just keeping that attention on the in-breath and the out-breath. And expanding our awareness to include the entire body. And then you might find that that's a very enjoyable feeling. And breathing in and breathing out, aware of the whole body. Noticing any pleasant feeling that arises. Even mindfulness in and of itself brings pleasant feeling. A kind of calm stability. And the body becomes gradually more and more and more calm. all of its systems, including breathing, become more calm. And you might feel warmth or tingling or fullness or some other indication that the mind is becoming more still. And we're becoming more aware of what you might call spiritual energy. This beautiful feeling, joyful, happy. Probably contented feeling, being present and aware. And we can notice any activity that we might experience in the mind. And maybe your thoughts are already quite far in the background. Or maybe there are things coming into the mind that want to distract us. Or maybe there still might be some sluggishness or dullness in the mind. So we can encourage energy to be heightened and bring more interest, more enthusiasm to the moment, or more calm and peace and tranquility. Have the inner voice saying to whatever thoughts are coming in to intrude, it's not the right time. Right now, we're here to meditate. Then we can notice the state of the mind. What's the mood? Is it contracted or expansive? Is it in a state of wanting? wanting something or wanting to get rid of something? Or is it content, open, available, alert, bright, calm? And just being aware of the state of the mind is helpful. And bringing in reflections that help to lift up the mind. The kind words or actions that we've offered or received, generosity, virtue, those beautiful qualities of the Buddha and the Dhamma, for which we're also grateful. And enlightened Sangha, showing us that awakening is a process and it's possible, and we're doing it. As the mind becomes more and more happy, uplifted, contented, the more it's ready for immersion into the breath, or into the light, or into the nimitta, whatever happens, letting go completely and utterly. Abandoning all clinging, all attachment, even if it's only for these few moments. Observing the in-breath and the out-breath until it becomes so still. There's nothing to observe. So today we're going to reflect on the Pali is Tina Mida, and it's often been translated as sloth and torpor, usually listed as the third hindrance. So we talked about sensual desire and ill will the last couple weeks, and those are kind of the big ones for many people. But for some, this dullness and drowsiness, another way it's translated often, is really can be very tenacious and difficult to deal with. So when you look at the Pali, Tina actually literally means stiffness. And if you're aware of or you experience this hindrance, then you might know that feeling. Just feel kind of stuck and paralyzed, not enough energy there or vigor. And Mida is more of the drowsiness or nodding, sleepy, or maybe a kind of sluggishness. And with all the hindrances, we really want to look at what's the cause. How do we free ourselves from it? And with drowsy dullness and drowsiness, it can be either a physical cause or a mental cause. So we want to look at, how is the body doing? And some of the physical causes can come from a lack of exercise or too much exercise, over exercise, or sometimes it's a food related kind of thing, poor nutrition if you don't have enough to eat or you don't have the nutrients that the body needs. And of course, a lot of times it's just that we need to sleep. There's a need for restful sleep. Or sometimes illness can be the cause. So that's the first distinction. Is this coming from a physical issue or is this coming from a mental issue? Now, the mental stuff can be things like overstimulation. So if we are dealing with a lot of sense input all day long, and we sit down and we become calm, the first thing the mind wants to do is just check out and go to sleep. And those are kind of two different things, right? When we just start nodding, falling asleep, that's one thing. But there's also that kind of dullness that just has us checking out. And it can be from maybe we just need some calm way of, slowing the mind down. But sometimes it's more than that. Sometimes we are really discontented or unhappy. Sometimes we just have something going on underneath the surface that we haven't addressed. And it needs some care and some time. And one thing that I really want to emphasize with all the hindrances and any mental state we encounter is to not be upset with ourselves for it. This is like there's some kind of little illness that we need to take care of. Might think of it that way, or not be feeling like, oh, here I go again. I can't stay awake during meditation. And some of our traditions and our cultures can be pretty harsh. And we want to not carry that into our meditation if we can help it, or at least notice if something like that is coming up. So the Buddha talked about discontent, and there were kind of several things that he talked about as the causes um, for this dullness and drowsiness: discontent, weariness, laziness, feeling drowsy after meals, or a sluggishness of mind. And one of the things that can be the source of discontent or a kind of resistance to meditation. This is something, drowsiness and dullness can come from this. And this can be like we're thinking of I should meditate. Or here I am, I'm meditating because I need to. It's become like a chore. It's become, just another thing on our to-do list. So I had no real enthusiasm there and interest, energy. And, sometimes we can think we're practicing letting go, but we're actually practicing pushing away. And there's a certain aversion there. Or maybe we are being kind of self-punishing in some way. Or sometimes there can actually be more of an indifference. And so just being aware, do you really want to be here meditating? This is what we can ask ourselves. And that's kind of in the discontent resistance category. Whereas the weariness and laziness, maybe there is a lack of initiative. Maybe we just don't know what to do in meditation. I don't think that's true for most of us here. But, there are sometimes we are kind of stuck. And, or bored, or maybe a little bit depressed. Or maybe there's some unresolved grief. So there are various things that we can look at. When we have that situation where we've eaten a meal, of course we try not to overeat because that can be a problem, and we feel tired, sometimes bringing some activity is enough, kind of pushing ourselves a little bit to do something. So the Buddha would recommend doing walking meditation after eating and, kind of get the system going. Oops. Okay. So those are some thoughts on, what might be going on underneath. And then I wanted to share with you a sutta briefly. And this is when Mahamoggallana was, I think, in the very beginning of his time as a monk with the Buddha. And some of you might know this sutta. It's in the Anguttara Nikaya in the Book of Sevens, number 61. And it's actually entitled Dozing. It's that kind of thing where you're just nodding. And it's kind of sweet. So the Buddha, with his psychic powers, recognizes or tunes into the fact that Moggallana is practicing and nodding and even having trouble with drowsiness. And so the sutta says that the Buddha disappeared from where he was and appeared where Mahamoggallana was, as quickly as a person might stretch out their arm or draw it in again. And then he says to Moggallana, "Are you dozing, Moggallana? Are you dozing?" And Mahamoggallana says, "Yes, Bhante." And I'm thinking, wow, that's so much better than "You're dozing. Why can't you wake up? Stop doing that." get with the program or whatever, it's like, he's just so like, are you dozing? Yes. Yes, I am. And he said, well, then you should not attend to or cultivate the object you're attending to, that you were attending to when you became drowsy. So change your meditation object. And then the drowsiness might go away. But if it doesn't, then you should ponder, examine, mentally inspect the Dhamma as you have heard it and learned it. So you start by changing your meditation object, trying to get interested in it, seeing if there's an interest there. And if that doesn't help, bring up some point of Dhamma that you've learned and really dig into it. And then the Buddha says, if that doesn't get rid of the drowsiness, then you should recite in detail Dhamma that you've heard and learned. So some of those things that we've memorized. So the Buddha he encouraged memorizing passages quite a bit. And of course, that's part of what the chanting is. You memorize it by chanting together. And then you bring that up and you chant internally, or maybe if you're by yourself, you can chant some out loud and see if the drowsiness subsides. And of course, there are going to be 7 of these, right? But actually, there's 8. So I like the last one too, because it is important. But here's the 4th one. If the first means didn't work yet, you pull on both your ears and you rub your limbs with your hands. So there's something that activates our wakefulness when we rub our ears or pull on them, and we rub our arms and legs. And if that doesn't work, get up from where you're sitting and wash your face, rub your eyes with water, look in all directions, look up at the stars. This is a lovely image. We can do that at the Hermitage. You can see the stars. But looking up, and then maybe the drowsiness will subside. But if that doesn't work, the Buddha said, bring up the perception of light. So you can actually do that in the mind, bringing up the perception of light as if night was day. And then it says, with a mind that is open and uncovered, you should develop a mind imbued with luminosity. And if that doesn't work, you should get up and do walking back and forth, walking meditation. And you're paying attention to or perceiving what's behind you and what's in front of you, with your sense faculties drawn in and your mind collected. And if none of that works, go lie down and rest. But put in your mind the idea that as soon as you wake up, you're going to get up and practice. So that's the advice from the Buddha. And then interestingly enough, he gives Mahamoggallana a couple of other points of advice. He says, you should train like this. We will not engage in contentious talk. It's in this way that you should train yourself. Because when there's contentious talk, an excess of words can be expected. And when there's an excess of words, one becomes restless. And when one is restless, one loses one's restraint. the mind of one without restraint is far from concentration. So that was one point he gave him. And the second one was, Moggallana, I do not praise bonding with everyone whatsoever, nor do I praise bonding with no one at all. I do not praise bonding with householders and monastics, but I do praise bonding with quiet and noiseless lodgings far from the flurry of people, remote from human habitation and suitable for seclusion. That was his second point. And when this was said, Venerable Mahamoggallana said to the Buddha, briefly, Bhante, how is a bhikkhu liberated in extinction from craving? Best among devas and humans, one who has reached the ultimate conclusion, won ultimate security from bondage, living with ultimate spiritual life, gained the ultimate consummation. And the Buddha says, when one has heard, nothing is worth holding to. When you've really heard that nothing is worth holding to, and you know that, you know everything, you know all things. And having known that directly, you fully understand all things. And having fully understood whatever feeling they feel, whether pleasant, painful, or neither painful nor pleasant, they dwell contemplating impermanence in those feelings, the fading away of those feelings, the cessation of those feelings, and the relinquishment of those feelings. And when one dwells contemplating impermanence, fading away, cessation, and relinquishment in those feelings, they do not cling to anything in the world. And not clinging, they're not agitated. Not agitated, they personally attain Nibbana. And they know, destroyed is birth, the spiritual life has been lived, and what had to be done has been done. There's no more coming back to this state of being. And then the Buddha says, this is the way one is best among devas and humans, reaching the ultimate conclusion, the ultimate security from bondage, the ultimate spiritual life, the ultimate consummation. So one of the things that I like about the sutta is that the Buddha is so kind and supportive, and I think he must have seen what Mahamoggallana's particular issues were at the time. And it makes me wonder, like, how much do those things that he talked about at the end have to do with, underlying causes for that drowsiness, that dullness of mind. And I think this is kind of a model in a number of ways, for us to be kind like that with ourselves as well as with others, instead of being harsh when we feel like, oh, the meditation's not going very well, I'm such a loser, and stuff. Don't go there. And just recognize that it's the consistent working with things that really brings results. So Ajahn Pasano told this story one time of, I don't even remember which monk it was. It was one of the Kruba Ajahns, someone who's very, very highly advanced. And he had come quite a distance to the monastery where Ajahn Pasano was. And it was already quite late at night, and it was one of those all-night sits, that that Ajahn Chah always had them doing, once a week. And this monk was already pretty elderly. And he came in, he didn't just, like go off to his kuti. He came in and sat down in the sala with the Sangha. And Ajahn Pasano said, and, you just see his head drop, and he'd come up again. And he said, he'd straighten himself, straighten his posture up. And then after a little while, again, he straightened himself up. And he said after that happened a few times, he straightened himself up and then it didn't happen again. He was just totally there, totally in samadhi. And, I think about that sometimes, like the sticking with it and not getting caught up in, oh, there's drowsiness, or I'm really tired. Sometimes the Buddha will say the way to overcome something is to not pay attention to it. Like he says, if you attend to, if you think, well, I'm really tired, then it just gets worse. But if you're like, okay, I'm gonna rise up here, give that a try. And it's kind of like what he goes through these 7 different options. And then at the end, it's like, yeah, take a rest. So it's good for us to, see how the Buddha offered training and how he himself practiced, and how those wonderful examples of people who are a bit further down the path than we are practice and, really absorb the best of it and apply it the best we can. So I think that's what I had to share. And I'm interested in your comments or experiences. Or questions or complaints. Like, why didn't you talk about how when you look in the bowl of water and it's sloth and torpor and it's all covered with algae and you can't see yourself? Yeah. That's there too. Hopeful image.
I found myself thinking, well, I was very alert during meditation, so I don't really have to pay attention to this talk on being slothful. And and about the same time you mentioned, like, inattention, I realized, oh, I'm not paying attention. I'm, and it's, I'm embarrassed to admit that, and it's not the content, it's just that I'm not totally there. And I love what you said about, well, what else is going on? And yeah, there's other stuff going on, but it's sort of that balance between just coming back to listening and thinking, like, what is that other thing that wants me entertained or feel like I'm bored? I want to go over here. And I think I had this really kind of frightening glimpse, like it went, oh, there's death over there. And it was just like, what? Like, and it feels like, I've heard this before, is that behind every fear, there's ultimately the fear of death. But it was like very vivid of like how terrified I am. I just had a second where I imagined, oh, my last breath. And I was chilled. And And so, of course, I want to distract myself from. I guess I just want to say I feel very afraid right now, like that this really does all end,
Mm.
and I'm just afraid, and I guess just to keep doing this, the hope that by looking at this and being with this, that I will learn, that I will accept. I didn't expect to come across this at all.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, do you have a sense of what you can do if you stand back and you observe this mind that fears death, what you can do to help it?
Mm.
What can you do?
What can I do?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I think just to come back to right now, this breath, this view, this you right now, that I'm here, and that it has no power over me,
Mm-hmm.
that I'm, by giving myself over to this, I'm just getting into this river and
Mm-hmm.
going along and just letting go of, not in a way inviting it in, maybe, or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think we actually can. There are a few things. Contemplate where this mind is headed, its orientation. That if we're not enlightened by the time we die, and if we are, it won't matter. We'll be just fine. But if we can reflect on where this mind, this process of spiritual development is headed, then we can become more and more secure about death being just fine. And wherever it goes after that, just fine.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that helps. It helps to really look at the reality like you are. And it helps to reflect on all the reasons why death is going to be a totally safe, fine experience. Even if it's going to be uncomfortable, maybe, but maybe not. Maybe it'll be easy. But regardless, it'll be impermanent. The process will be impermanent. And that where we land, it will be a good landing. Instead of just letting death be kind of hiding in the corner, jumping out of the closet at us once in a while, or something. Just really be there with it.
Okay.
Yeah. I
Excellent.
love what this one monk said back in the 20s, and he gave a lot of funeral talks, and he said, death is your friend. You're going to need that when the time comes. And when the right time, and he said the right time is whenever death comes. Think of that as your friend. Something's got to get us out of this body as it goes really decrepit. Anyway, a few ideas maybe.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, Danny. Linda?
This was an amazingly practical sutta. for me, dullness and drowsiness generally are not a big obstacle for me. I'm sort of on the other end of the spectrum with with a lot of energy going on. And when I've experienced this, it's mostly been in retreat, and it's pretty predictable after I'm on retreat, just, a little while. And, I've been deprived of all this, sensory input that I'm used to. Then all of a sudden it's just, a little too quiet. And that's when I'll experience it. And I had been given some suggestions at one point that were a little different than this. And it was just to be with it. Mm. Of course, assuming there's mindfulness there. I mean, if there's no mindfulness, there's no point. And sometimes it would go on for several, sitting periods, and then all of a sudden it was gone. And when I see this list, and it might just be my personality, for me, I think what might be brought up is a bit of aversion. I have to get rid of this, and here's my to-do list for how to do it. Mm-hmm. And so I just was going to mention that and see if you had any comments.
Well, it sounds like the advice you got was perfect for you. And it is interesting, to ask, well, the Buddha was very proactive a lot of times, like, hey, this happens, do this, And it's also good to notice that the Buddha encouraged us to be with things too, so I think that, maybe it was just the timing. He showed up after Mahamoggallana had been struggling with this for a while, maybe being present with it, trying to be mindful with it, which wasn't working. That phase probably already passed. And so I think it's good. I mean, there's definitely, the Buddha, every time we do anapanasati, if you walk yourself through the instructions. And I want to say that walking ourselves through the instructions is a training. We want to get to the place where, we really don't need the instructions so much. We still are doing it quite naturally, but there's always that observe what's happening in the mind, observe it. So observe these tendencies. I mean, if you really, look at the foundations of mindfulness, or maybe a better translation is the applications of mindfulness, it starts with saying you've already overcome the hindrances before you even begin. And so just some thoughts. It's like when you look at the Buddha's teachings, he comes at it from different angles at different times. And I have a lot of, I guess, faith that he was doing that, knowing what was happening for people in front of him. And so, yeah, thanks for that advice, which is probably perfect for other times. Yeah.
And I just wanted to make one other comment that it's not maybe indirectly related. But when Ajahn Brahmali was speaking a few weeks ago, there was something he said that really impacted me, and that was that sitting down to meditation, to not immediately rush into the breath. Mm-hmm. And he said, establish mindfulness and let the breath come to you. Mm-hmm. And that, to me, that was like what I found myself doing is often, and in my case, it was usually more agitation than drowsiness, but that I'd sit down and the breathing for me was almost like a backdrop. And then the thoughts were just going on in the forefront. So I was kind of just lost there. I mean, there was some awareness of the breathing, and so now what I do is before I even notice the breath, I really pay attention to just my, my seat on the chair, kind of grounding. And I love that idea of just letting the breath come to me, and it's much more natural. It's not I'm not doing the breathing. It's just, I'm just breathing.
Nice.
And that has really helped me establish mindfulness a lot quicker. And I think that with whether it's the restlessness or even the drowsiness, if there's a good foundation of mindfulness, I think it's a lot easier to deal with these hindrances for sure.
Yes. Yeah. Lovely, Linda. Thank you. Yeah, when you were talking about the breath coming to you, I was thinking, yeah, sometimes I need to call it a little, but it's like calling a cat. Here, kitty, kitty. And then it might come. All right. Thank you. It's helpful. Yeah, James.
So quick question and a bit of a comment, I guess. You said about, what was it, bringing up perception of light, the mind imbued with luminosity. What does that actually mean? I didn't quite follow that.
I know it can be a little hard to imagine, but the way I have experienced it, and also I was talking about this with Aya Chitananda, and she said, "Oh yeah, that's totally doable." And it's really, you're sitting there with your eyes closed, and you start to imagine light, and just see what happens. And maybe that's something that just comes about or not, but just see if that works, and just give it some time and just just imagine light, and it might really fill the mind.
Okay. I mean, also, I think Linda's probably already said much what I was going to say, is that, I don't usually, I'm not aware of having much problems with sort of sleepiness and sloth and torpor, but retreats are another thing. I mean, it's I always found, well, I've only done a couple so far, but I've certainly found that the first couple of days tend to be lost to, the tiredness of just general life catching up with me. Now I've finally sort of rested. I certainly found with the last one that I got over that by sleeping through sessions where I should have been doing walking meditation and things like that. But after that, I think I found that maybe if I'm just on a normal daily basis, say if I do a couple of meditations in a row or with a little gap, then you get a bit more peaceful each time. But I kind of expected the same thing to happen on retreats, but I found, particularly with the last one in November, that it was more like, it wasn't so much peaceful, but sort of like, I just felt a bit kind of, it was definitely peaceful, but I felt kind of blankly, kind of like flat, you know what I mean? Does that make any sense? Whether that was kind of dullness, sloth, torpor, without me quite recognizing it as such, I'm not sure.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's important to really look at that and look, like this whole idea of what's under it. Is there some way to bring up more energy, more enthusiasm, more interest? Do I need to take a different meditation object, or, like get a little more vigorous walking? So like a number of the Ajahn Chah monks, Ajahn Gana is very into this. Ajahn Mahabua is like, like walk fast. Sometimes you really do fast walking meditation. I knew a monk who was doing very fast walking meditation on his path, and then this little snake jumped out and bit him. That's not so good, but maybe you could do it with sand snake somewhere if you want a little more energy. But yeah, don't waste your time letting the mind float. That's one of the things that can happen. You can waste a lot of time that way, where it's just kind of a bit floaty and dull. And, it's good to really pay attention to that. That is a hindrance because you're not really going into deep stillness. You're just not really going anywhere. And so we want to know that and do something about it. Linda was really referring to this too. Is at that point, there's not much mindfulness and you're not really, yeah. So I don't know if that was what you're experiencing, James, but it's something to look.
Generally speaking, I'm just surprised how exhausting I find sort of more intensive practice. I don't know whether that's an indication I might be perhaps trying too hard or something. I thought it might be sort of restful, and yet it's surprisingly tiring just to sit around all day and try and which just seems counterintuitive. Well, is that just me? Am I trying too hard, or do I think most people feel that way? Maybe I don't know.
I don't know. I think the first place to look, and you already mentioned it too, is that many of us are just sleep deprived and exhausted, like a deep tiredness. And when I do retreat, I let myself just sleep as much as I want the first couple days. Yeah. And it really helps. And then I'm really ready to meditate. And so there might be some real drowsiness there, or, that's some kind of unresolved grief or whatever might be underneath, to really be able to take a look at that and be kind. And
perhaps dullness could even be a way of escaping, because I sort of have sort of ill will kind of come up at retreats, which has sort of thrown me a bit. So maybe the dullness is the mind's way of trying to avoid facing that, perhaps.
It could very well be. And facing it, like sometimes really, I know I keep saying this, but sometimes our aversion to our own mental states can be quite strong, and we don't want to feel the way we feel. We don't want to think the way we think. And it's just old stuff. It's old karma. It's vipaka karma. We don't have to feel responsible for it. We just need to work with it. And so, it could be something, quite just irrelevant, but we want to really, really pay attention and see what's there.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for your comments. Julie?
Yes, this sutta brings to mind that sometimes I find that I can make an excuse for some reason. In my case, it's age, and I think, well, at this age, this is the way you are. I found myself challenging that when you were reading the sutta. Just letting myself off far too easy to really look at this. And, I do get enough sleep. And so it's a way to just not be quite so ready to let yourself off the hook.
Mm-hmm.
So I thank you for that. And I'll certainly look into that for other reasons. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Julie. I don't know, you're a pretty shining example for all of us in your mid-90s?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of pushing on the other end, but.
Oh, yeah? How old are you now?
Well, in 2 or 3 days, I'll be 98.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
Thank you for this amazing practice and your sharing with us and your presence. And I know this idea of letting ourselves off way too easy. It's possible that we do that, and thinking about this sutta, I was thinking about another sutta where the Buddha talks about two monks coming to the monastery, and it's like right at the end of the mealtime, and they've been traveling and they're hungry and weak, and he said if he were to say, oh, here's what's left over in my bowl that I'm not going to eat, you can have it. And he says there's the monk who will say yes and eat it, and he'll say to himself, okay, and then I can practice and I'll be stronger. And there'll be another monk who will say, no, that's okay. And even though he's weak, he goes to practice, and he practices, and the Buddha says he favors the one who resisted taking the food. And I always think, wow, that's rough. But he said, like that one is going to have more like courage and enthusiasm. And I know what he means. It's like, of course, we can't deny ourselves basic needs all the time, over and over. We have to be wise, but it's like if we really push ourselves a bit and we come through it, we have more confidence. And it's not just a mind of, oh, I have to go lie down. Oh, I have to go lie down. It's I can do it. Yeah, thank you, Julie. Lisa?
I feel kind of funny saying this now after that the story of toughing it out, because
please represent the other side. We need both.
Sometimes that works, I think, especially if you see good results. But for me, I've struggled a lot with sloth and torpor, and not so much recently, which I'm really happy about. You started out your talk going into looking at the causes, and for me, that's really important. And maybe there are physical causes, but also my attitude toward this hindrance is so important. Just taking an attitude of curiosity about it can arouse more energy for me, and self-care rather than a self-improvement kind of punishing, turns into a punishing kind of process for me. So like James was saying, sometimes torpor can be kind of a shutting down that's covering up something else, like aversion, or for me, it's often doubt about the process and about my ability in doing this. So, rousing the energy to investigate, maybe not during the meditation, but and trying different things in a very self-care way is good for me.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, it's really, the Buddha gave so many different approaches, and clearly applying the medicine that's needed for the condition that we experience, and applying it in the right amount. And so this is part of our investigation. And the more we can bring curiosity and interest and enthusiasm and confidence from what we've already learned and experienced, the better. So it's really lovely to have everyone's perspective, because then we see, like the Buddha giving so many different approaches. Sometimes we have to take it one way, and sometimes we have to take it a different way. And that's where our wisdom develops. What's really happening here, and what's our goal. If we keep that goal of awakening in mind, then we're going to do the things that bring us in that direction. and all of the attendant value that comes from the development of our character in the process. So it's a beautiful path. And sometimes it's hard, but it's really amazing. So thank you, everyone. And I hope you take good care of yourself